The Illusory Truth Effect. If you hear something often enough, you'll start believing it, whether it's true or not. This is the core of the Illusory Truth Effect. It's why propaganda works, why fake news spreads like wildfire, and why we tend to believe rumors, even when we know they don't make sense. But why does this happen? The human brain is lazy when it comes to truth-checking. It takes effort to analyze every single thing we hear. So instead, we use shortcuts. One of these shortcuts is familiarity. If something feels familiar because we've heard it multiple times, our brain assumes it must be true. This is how false ideas gain traction, how misinformation becomes widely accepted. Think about common misconceptions. Sugar makes kids hyperactive. Parents everywhere believe this, but studies show it's false. Yet because it's repeated so often, people assume it's true. We only use 10% of our brains, a completely debunked myth. Yet movies and self-help books have repeated it so often, many people still accept it as fact. Lightning never strikes the same place twice. It does very often, in fact. Yet this false idea is repeated so frequently, it's accepted as truth. Advertising uses the illusory truth effect masterfully. You hear a slogan like, "Red Bull gives you wings," enough times. And even though you logically know Red Bull won't make you fly, your brain starts associating it with energy and alertness. Repetition in political campaigns is another huge example. If a candidate repeats a phrase like, "We are the strongest economy in history," over and over, people begin to accept it as fact, even if data says otherwise. A study in 1977 by researchers Lynn Hasher, David Goldstein, and Thomas Topino proved this effect in action. Participants were shown both true and false statements multiple times. The more they saw a statement, the more likely they were to rate it as true, even when they had no evidence to support it. More recent studies confirm this. Even when people know a statement is false, repeated exposure makes them feel like it's true. This feeling of familiarity is powerful because the brain values ease over accuracy. Now that you know how this trick works, how can you protect yourself from it? Question repeated statements. Just because you hear something often doesn't mean it's true. Look for evidence. Ask yourself, where did this information come from? Is there real proof? Expose yourself to multiple viewpoints. If you only hear one side of a story, you'll be more likely to believe it, even if it's false. Be aware of emotional manipulation. The more an idea is repeated in an emotional way, the more likely it is to stick. Repetition is one of the most powerful psychological weapons, and it can work for good or bad. Now that you know about the illusory truth effect, you won't be so easily fooled. The Zeigarnik Effect. Have you ever started watching a TV show and found yourself obsessed with finishing it, even if you weren't that interested? That's the Zeigarnik Effect in action. This psychological trick explains why unfinished tasks stick in our minds more than completed ones. It's the reason cliffhangers keep us watching, why to-do lists create anxiety, and why we can't stop thinking about things we've left undone. TV cliffhangers are a perfect example. You finish an episode, and suddenly it ends on a dramatic moment. You can't stop thinking about what will happen next. The show has hooked you. Unfinished arguments work the same way. Ever had a disagreement that didn't get resolved? You keep replaying it in your head, thinking about what you should have said. Incomplete work has the same effect. Leave a task half done, and your brain won't let it go. It will nag you until you finish it. Bluma Zeigarnik, a Russian psychologist, discovered this effect in the 1920s. She observed that waiters in a cafe could remember unpaid orders, but forgot them as soon as they were settled. The unfinished nature of unpaid bills kept them fresh in their minds. Your brain sees unfinished tasks as incomplete puzzles, just like an open loop. Your mind wants to close it. This creates mental tension that sticks until the task is completed. Studies show this tension increases focus and motivation, but only if we feel capable of finishing the task. If a task feels too overwhelming, it can lead to procrastination instead. Starting something, even if you don't finish it, can be a powerful way to boost motivation. Struggling to get things done? Just begin. Your brain will naturally want to complete what it started. For studying instead of cramming, stop mid-chapter. Your brain will feel the urge to remember and continue the next day. Sales and marketing use this effect all the time. Free trials, unfinished stories, teaser ads. They're all designed to make you want more. If you tend to overthink, this effect can make you obsess over things you didn't finish. Feeling anxious? Train your brain by writing down unfinished tasks. This helps give your brain a sense of closure, even without actually completing them. If you struggle with sleep, an incomplete task list can keep you awake. Try a brain dump before bed. Write everything down so your brain can relax. The Zeigarnik Effect is a powerful mental trick. It keeps people engaged, focused, and motivated, but it can also drive you crazy if you don't control it. Now that you know how it works, you can use it for productivity instead of stress. These two psychological tricks, the Illusory Truth Effect and the Zeigarnik Effect, shape how we think, remember, and behave. One makes us believe false information. The other makes us obsess over unfinished tasks. Both can be used to your advantage, or they can manipulate you without you even realizing it. Now you're one step ahead. Reverse psychology. Tell someone not to do something, and suddenly they want to do it even more. This is the foundation of reverse psychology, a mind trick so effective that parents, marketers, and even manipulators use it all the time. It plays on a natural human tendency, the urge to resist being controlled. People like to believe they are in charge of their own decisions. The moment they feel restricted, they instinctively push back against authority. This psychological reaction is called reactance, a mental rebellion against being told what to do. When someone says, "You can't do that," the brain doesn't hear a rule. It hears a challenge. It happens everywhere. A teenager who was never interested in a party might suddenly feel an irresistible urge to go the moment a parent says, "You're not allowed to go." A customer might ignore an ad, but when the product is labeled only for the most daring buyers, it suddenly becomes intriguing. A child who refuses to eat vegetables might take a bite just because the parent sighs and says, "Fine, I guess you're just not strong enough to eat carrots." The forbidden fruit effect is real. The scarcity principle amplifies it. If something is off limits, we assume it must be special or valuable. That's why people crave limited edition products, or why a banned book suddenly skyrockets in popularity. Marketers use reverse psychology constantly. Some ads say, "This deal isn't for everyone," implying only the smart or elite buyers will take advantage. Suddenly everyone wants in. Some websites display, "Only 2 left in stock," triggering the instinct to grab it before it's gone. The fear of missing out. FOMO kicks in, making the purchase feel urgent. Reverse psychology also appears in negotiation tactics. If someone is hesitant about a deal, the other party might say, "You're probably not interested, and that's fine." That subtle suggestion, it makes the hesitant person more eager to prove they are interested. Salespeople use this to push indecisive buyers into closing deals. One of the most powerful uses of reverse psychology is in leadership and persuasion. A manager might say, "I doubt anyone is brave enough to take on this challenge." And suddenly, employees step up to prove them wrong. Coaches do it too. "You probably can't run another lap, can you?" Which sparks the drive to prove otherwise. But there's a dark side. Manipulative individuals use reverse psychology to control others without appearing controlling. In toxic relationships, someone might say, "Fine, leave if you want," knowing it will provoke guilt and make the other person stay. Some use it to create artificial scarcity, making themselves seem unattainable, so others will chase them. Recognizing reverse psychology when it's used against you is key to protecting your autonomy. When someone tells you not to do something, pause and ask yourself, am I making this choice because I truly want to, or because I feel pressured by the restriction? Taking a step back can help you break free from emotional manipulation and make clearer decisions. Reverse psychology is a powerful tool, but it works best when used subtly. The more obvious it is, the less effective it becomes. The key to making it work: don't sound like you're trying to control someone, because the moment they sense manipulation, it backfires. Anchoring bias. The first piece of information you hear in a conversation has more power over your decision than you think. This is anchoring bias, a mental shortcut where the brain clings to the first number, idea, or statement as a reference point, even if it's completely random. This trick is why salespeople start negotiations with a high price, even if they plan to lower it. You feel like a $100 discount is a great deal, even if the original price was artificially inflated. And it's why your first impression of someone sticks, even when later evidence contradicts it. Anchoring bias works because the human brain doesn't process information in isolation. Instead, it compares new data to what it already knows. The first number or statement you hear becomes the foundation, and everything after that is judged relative to it. Imagine this. You walk into a store and see a jacket priced at $500. Then you see another one at $150. The second jacket feels like a steal. But what if you had seen the $150 jacket first, followed by one priced at $50? Suddenly, that $150 jacket seems overpriced. The actual value hasn't changed, but your perception has, because of the anchor. Businesses use anchoring to frame decisions in their favor. Ever noticed how restaurants list an outrageously expensive dish at the top of the menu? Almost no one orders it, but it makes everything else look reasonably priced in comparison. Real estate agents show buyers overpriced houses first, so the next ones seem like bargains. Tech companies launch a premium version of a product, so the regular version appears more affordable. Anchoring bias even affects salary negotiations. If a company offers you $40,000, your mind locks onto that number even if you deserve more. But if you propose $60,000 first, the negotiation revolves around a higher starting point. The first number sets the stage. It even shows up in courtroom decisions. If a lawyer asks for an unusually high settlement, the final amount awarded is likely to be higher, even if it's less than the original demand. Judges, juries, and negotiators all unconsciously lean toward the anchor. Anchoring bias can also distort how we perceive people. If someone is introduced as brilliant, you consciously look for signs of intelligence. If they're described as difficult, you filter their actions through that lens. First impressions stick because of anchoring, but it's not just external. People anchor their own beliefs too. If you've always thought of yourself as bad at math, that belief becomes an anchor. Even when you improve, your mind holds on to the old identity, making it harder to recognize progress. Avoiding anchoring bias requires deliberate thinking. Instead of accepting the first piece of information as fact, challenge it. When you see a discount, ask yourself, what was the original price? Was it fair? When negotiating, don't let the other person set the anchor. Set it yourself. Recognizing the power of anchoring can change how you make decisions. If you control the first number or idea in a conversation, you control the entire frame of reference. And if you're aware when others try to anchor you, you'll be able to break free from its influence. The Ben Franklin Effect. It seems logical to assume that if you help someone, they'll feel grateful and be more inclined to return the favor. But strangely enough, psychology suggests the opposite. People who do a favor for you are actually more likely to help you again than those you help. This is known as the Ben Franklin Effect, a counterintuitive trick of the mind that rewires how we see others based on our own actions. The effect was named after Benjamin Franklin, who used it to turn an adversary into an ally. Franklin once had a political rival who openly disliked him. Instead of trying to win him over with kindness or persuasion, Franklin did something unexpected. He asked the rival for a small favor, to borrow a rare book from his collection. The rival, feeling flattered by the request, agreed. When Franklin returned the book with sincere gratitude, the man's attitude toward him completely changed. He became friendly. Their relationship improved from then on. Franklin reflected on this in his autobiography, realizing something profound. Once someone does something kind for you, they subconsciously justify it by thinking, I must like this person if I'm willing to help them. This psychological trick works because of cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort we feel when our actions contradict our beliefs. If someone disliked you but then did something nice for you, their brain struggles with the contradiction. Instead of admitting they were wrong about you, they adjust their beliefs to match their actions. They think, maybe I actually like this person. The Ben Franklin effect plays out in everyday life, in subtle yet powerful ways. Ask a coworker for help on a small task. They're more likely to help you again in the future. Get a neighbor to do you a minor favor. Their willingness to help increases. The more people invest in assisting you, the more their brain rationalizes that they care about you. Conversely, this effect also explains why doing too many favors for others doesn't always make them like you more. If you're constantly helping someone, they might start to feel obligated or even resentful. But if they help you, their brain convinces them that they must value the relationship. This trick is widely used in social and business situations. Salespeople often ask customers to perform a small action, like filling out a survey or leaving feedback. Once someone invests effort, they become more open to continued engagement. Politicians use it too. A candidate might ask supporters to donate just a small amount. Why? Because even a tiny investment makes people more likely to stay psychologically committed. To use the Ben Franklin effect to your advantage, start by requesting small favors from people you want to build positive relationships with. It's a subtle, powerful way to strengthen connections. And if you ever find yourself disliking someone, try doing something nice for them. Your brain just might trick you into liking them more. The paradox of choice. More options should make decisions easier, right? It seems logical to think that having more choices means a greater likelihood of finding exactly what you want. But in reality, the opposite happens. The more options people have, the harder it becomes to choose, often leading to decision paralysis, regret, and dissatisfaction. This psychological phenomenon is known as the paradox of choice. At first glance, having many options feels empowering. Walking into a store with hundreds of cereal brands should mean you'll find the perfect one. A dating app with endless potential matches should increase your chance of finding an ideal partner. An online marketplace with thousands of products should ensure you get the best deal. But instead of feeling satisfied, people become overwhelmed. So, the problem? When faced with too many options, the brain struggles to process all the possible outcomes. Decision-making slows down. Instead of confidently choosing, people hesitate, overanalyze, or avoid making a decision altogether. This is why people often take longer to pick a show on Netflix than to actually watch one. The sheer number of choices creates anxiety. What if they pick the wrong one? Psychologist Barry Schwartz, who popularized the paradox of choice, conducted experiments showing that when people were given fewer options, they were more likely to make a decision and feel happier with it. In one famous study, grocery store customers were shown 2 displays of jam samples, one with 6 flavors and another with 24. While more people were drawn to the larger selection, the group with fewer choices was 10 times more likely to actually buy a jar. This effect is everywhere. In the job market, people with too many career options often struggle to commit, fearing they might miss out on something better. In relationships, dating apps create an illusion of unlimited possibilities, making people hesitant to settle always wondering if someone better is out there. In online shopping, hours of scrolling often end in regret, thinking they might have missed a superior product. Choice paralysis doesn't just slow decisions, it lowers satisfaction too. When people finally choose, they tend to feel less happy because they second-guess themselves. If a restaurant has 10 dishes and you pick one, you might feel good about your choice. But if there are 100 dishes, you might constantly wonder if you picked the best one, leading to regret. Businesses and designers have learned to combat this. High-end brands reduce their product lines to avoid overwhelming customers. Streaming services curate top picks to narrow down choices. Productivity experts recommend limiting your to-do list to just a few tasks per day to reduce decision fatigue. One of the best ways to counteract the paradox of choice: set clear criteria before choosing. If you know what you want in a job, relationship, or purchase, you can eliminate irrelevant options quickly instead of endlessly comparing. Another method: give yourself a time limit to decide. The less time you spend overanalyzing, the less anxiety you feel and the more satisfied you become. Having choices is good up to a point, but when there are too many, it creates stress instead of freedom. By understanding the paradox of choice, you can make quicker, more confident decisions and actually enjoy what you choose. The door in the face technique. If you ask for something outrageous and get rejected, then follow up with a much smaller request. That second request suddenly seems reasonable, even if it wouldn't have been accepted on its own. This is the door in the face technique, a psychological trick that makes people more likely to agree to what you really want, but first presenting them with an extreme ask. At first glance, it seems counterintuitive. Why would someone reject a big request, but then agree to a smaller one right after? The answer lies in a subconscious need for compromise. When someone says no to a large request, they often feel guilty or uncomfortable, especially if the person asking seems sincere. When the smaller request follows, it feels like they're meeting in the middle, restoring a sense of fairness. This technique works because of a psychological principle called reciprocal concessions. When one party appears to back down, the other person feels a subtle obligation to do the same. The second request feels more reasonable, not because it truly is, but because it's being compared to the first one. Salespeople, negotiators, and fundraisers use this tactic all the time. Imagine a charity worker asks you to donate $500 to a cause. You decline, it's too much. Then they say, okay, how about just $20? Suddenly, $20 seems totally reasonable, even though you might not have considered donating if they had asked for that amount first. Retailers use this trick too. A store might try to sell you an expensive bundle of products. When you hesitate, they say, okay, how about just this one item? By comparison, the single item now feels affordable, and even if you had no plans to buy anything at all. Even parents unknowingly use the door in the face technique. A parent might ask their child to clean the entire house. The child refuses. Then the parent says, okay, at least clean your room. Now the child, feeling like they got out of something worse, agrees. But if the parent had started with clean your room, the child might have said no. This technique also works in negotiations. Let's say an employee wants a $5,000 raise. Instead, they ask for $10,000. The employer declines. Then the employee compromises and asks for $5,000, making it seem like a reasonable middle ground. But there's a limit to how extreme the first request can be. If it's too absurd, the person may feel manipulated and reject everything. The best way to use the door in the face technique is to make the first request big but not ridiculous. If the person believes the first ask is something you genuinely want, the second request feels like a fair adjustment, not a psychological trick. Understanding this technique allows you to recognize when it's being used on you. Next time someone presents a massive request, then quickly scales it down, pause and ask yourself, would I have agreed to this second request if it were the first one I heard? If not, you're likely being influenced by the door in the face technique. The foot in the door technique. If you can get someone to say yes to a small request, they're far more likely to agree to a larger one later. This is the foot in the door technique, a psychological trick based on the idea that once people commit to something small, they feel compelled to stay consistent with their actions. The effect happens because of a powerful force in human psychology, the need for consistency. People like to see themselves as rational and dependable. Once they say yes to something minor, their brain starts forming an identity around that decision. So when they're asked to do something bigger later, they feel internal pressure to stay aligned with the commitment they've already made. This technique is used everywhere: sales, marketing, politics, and even friendships. A salesperson might ask, "Can I take just 5 minutes of your time?" If you agree, you've already said yes to engaging. Later, when they ask you to sign up for something, you're much more likely to comply because you've already invested in the interaction. Charities use this method too. They might first ask you to sign a petition. You think, sure, why not? But later, when they ask for a donation, you're more inclined to give because you've already demonstrated support. Marketers use this strategy to hook consumers. A company might offer a free trial or a small freebie. Once you engage with the brand, you feel more comfortable making a purchase. Subscription services like Netflix and Amazon Prime take full advantage of this. They offer free trials, knowing that once users have invested time, canceling feels disruptive, like breaking a routine. Social situations work the same way. If a friend asks to borrow a pen, you won't hesitate. But later, if they ask to borrow your car for a day, you're more likely to say yes than if they had asked for the car up front. Your brain rationalizes, I already helped them. I must be the kind of person who helps them. This technique is so effective. It's even been used in historical events. During the Korean War, American prisoners of war in Chinese camps were subtly manipulated using foot-in-the-door tactics. Instead of forcing them to adopt communist beliefs, captors started with tiny requests like, "The U.S. isn't perfect." Over time, these small admissions led some prisoners to willingly write pro-communist statements, believing they were acting of their own free will. The foot-in-the-door technique is powerful, but it can be recognized and resisted. If you ever find yourself agreeing to something bigger than what you originally intended, ask yourself, would I have agreed to this if I hadn't already committed to something smaller? If not, you're likely being influenced by this psychological effect. Being aware of these techniques allows you to navigate situations more effectively. The door-in-the-face technique gets people to agree by making them feel like they're compromising, while the foot-in-the-door technique builds commitment gradually. Both are powerful tools of influence, whether you're the one using them or the one being influenced. The Decoy Effect. Sometimes making a decision feels effortless. One option just seems better. But what if your brain was being tricked into thinking that way? The Decoy Effect is a psychological strategy that influences decision-making by introducing a third, intentionally less attractive option, making one of the original two seem like the obvious choice. This effect is used everywhere, from pricing strategies in business to marketing tactics designed to nudge consumers toward a specific decision. To understand how it works, imagine this. You're at a movie theater. The menu offers 2 sizes of popcorn, a small for $3 and a large for $7. You might hesitate. Do you really want to spend that much on a large? Now imagine a third option appears, a medium for $6. Suddenly, the large popcorn seems like an incredible deal. It's just $1 more than the medium. Most people would now choose the large, even if they originally weren't planning to spend that much. The medium option was never meant to sell. It was there to push you toward the large. This works because of relative comparison. On its own, a $7 popcorn seems expensive, but placed next to a $6 medium, the large no longer feels overpriced. It feels like a bargain. Your brain doesn't evaluate the options in isolation. It compares them to each other The decoy creates an illusion of value, influencing you to pick the intended choice. Marketers and businesses use the decoy effect constantly. A tech company might offer 3 versions of a product: a basic model, a premium model, and a decoy model, slightly worse, but almost as expensive as the premium. The decoy makes the premium option look significantly better by comparison, pushing customers to spend more. This trick also appears on restaurant menus. Take a wine list, for example. It might include a cheap bottle, a mid-range bottle, and an expensive one. Most people go for the mid-range. But restaurants know that if they add a slightly more expensive, but clearly inferior wine, the mid-range option suddenly looks like it's the best value. The decoy effect is even used in politics and negotiations. If a politician or company wants one proposal to seem more appealing, they introduce a similar but slightly worse option. Suddenly, the one they wanted you to pick in the first place seems like the clear winner. So how do you protect yourself from this trick? Evaluate your choices independently, not comparatively. Ask yourself, would I still pick this option if the third one didn't exist? If the answer is no, you might be falling for the decoy effect, the scarcity principle. If something seems rare, exclusive, or about to run out, it instantly becomes more desirable. This is the scarcity principle, a psychological effect that makes people place higher value on things perceived to be in limited supply. Whether it's a product, an opportunity, or even attention from another person, scarcity makes it feel significantly more important. This effect is hardwired into human psychology. Throughout history, scarcity signaled survival. Resources like food and water were precious when rare, making humans instinctively prioritize them. Even though we now live in a world of abundance, the brain still reacts to perceived scarcity, as if it's a life or death matter. Retailers use this trick constantly. Online stores display only 3 left in stock, creating a sense of urgency. Limited time sales make people rush to buy things they didn't even want before. Black Friday is the perfect example. Products are available all year, but the fear of missing out, FOMO, during the sale causes a buying frenzy. Luxury brands have mastered the art of scarcity. High-end watches, handbags, and sneakers are often produced in small quantities, not because they can't make more, but because they know scarcity increases demand. People want what they can't easily have. When Apple releases a new iPhone and stock runs low, anticipation skyrockets. People who wouldn't have rushed to buy it suddenly feel an overwhelming need to get one. The scarcity principle also applies in relationships and social settings. A person who is always available is often taken for granted, but someone who's selective with their time is perceived as more valuable. In dating, people who seem harder to get often appear more attractive, even if they're not necessarily better partners. The feeling of potential loss makes them seem more desirable. Travel and hotel booking sites use this effect aggressively. Messages like, "Only 1 room left at this price," or 5 people are looking at this right now, create pressure. The same happens with airline tickets, where prices appear to fluctuate based on demand, a tactic designed to manufacture urgency. Psychologists have tested this principle in experiments. In one study, participants were given 2 identical jars of cookies, one full, one nearly empty. Even though the cookies were the same, people consistently rated the cookies in the near-empty jar as tasting better. The fewer there were, the more valuable they seemed. Scarcity also plays a role in decision-making. A job offer with limited spots seems more prestigious. A social media post that disappears in 24 hours is more likely to be watched than one that's available forever. Even information is affected. Secret or restricted knowledge feels more valuable than something widely accessible. Recognizing the scarcity principle allows you to break free from unnecessary pressure. Ask yourself, do I really want this, or am I just reacting to the idea that I might lose it? If you take a step back, the urgency fades, and you can make clearer decisions. Scarcity is a powerful illusion, but it only works if you let it in. The next time something feels overwhelmingly desirable, just because it's rare, remember, just because something is hard to get doesn't mean it's worth having. The framing effect, the way information is presented, can completely alter how people perceive and react to it. This is known as the framing effect, a powerful cognitive bias where the same piece of information leads to different decisions, depending on whether it's framed positively or negatively. In short, it's not what you say, but how you say it that influences decision-making. Imagine you're about to undergo surgery. The doctor presents two different statistics. This procedure has a 90% survival rate. This procedure has a 10% fatality rate. The facts are identical, but the way they're framed changes how they feel. The first statement sounds reassuring. The second sounds risky. People are far more likely to proceed with surgery when they hear the 90% survival version, even though both communicate the same reality. This effect is used everywhere, from politics to marketing to everyday conversations. News outlets frame stories to evoke specific emotions. A headline that reads, "Crime rate drops to 5%" sounds positive. But one that says, "1 in 20 people are still victims of crime" sounds concerning. Both describe the same reality, yet the emotional impact is completely different. Marketers rely on the framing effect to shape consumer behavior. A label that says 95% fat-free makes a product sound healthier than one that says almost 5% fat, even though they mean the same thing. Similarly, a store might advertise 20% discount rather than "you're paying 80% of the price." Both statements are mathematically identical, but the presentation affects how desirable the deal seems. In finance, the framing effect plays a major role in investment decisions. A stock report that says the market gained 3% this month makes investors feel optimistic. But one that says the market is still down 10% from last year can cause anxiety. Even though both are true at the same time, the framing shifts emotional reactions. It also affects personal relationships. Consider how feedback is delivered. "You made a mistake, but you learned a lot" encourages growth. "You failed at this" discourages and deflates. Parents, teachers, and managers can shape confidence and motivation simply by choosing whether to frame feedback in a positive or a negative light. Politicians use framing all the time. Policies are branded as job creators instead of corporate tax breaks, public safety measures instead of surveillance programs. The wording changes how people feel about a policy before they even consider the facts. The framing effect is especially dangerous because it often works subconsciously. People believe they're making rational choices, but in reality, their decisions are swayed by the way information is presented. Recognizing this bias helps you counteract its influence. Next time you're faced with a decision, pause and ask yourself, am I reacting to the facts or to the way they've been framed? By stepping back, you regain control over how you interpret information instead of letting the framing dictate your emotions. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion. You learn a new word and suddenly you hear it everywhere. You buy a new car and now you see the same model on the road constantly. You start researching a niche topic and within days it seems like the whole world is obsessed with it too. This is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, also known as the frequency illusion, a trick your brain plays on you, making it feel like something has suddenly become more common, when in reality, you've just started noticing it more. This effect happens because the human brain is wired to recognize patterns. Once you become aware of something new, your mind subconsciously starts filtering for it. It was always there, but now your selective attention is tuned to it. The world hasn't changed. Your perception has. The Baader-Meinhof effect is a mix of selective attention, confirmation, bias. Selective attention occurs when your brain starts unconsciously scanning for something relevant. If you just got interested in electric cars, your mind will now pick up on every Tesla or Prius you pass, even though they've always been around. Confirmation bias kicks in when your brain reinforces the idea that these things have suddenly become more frequent, even if they haven't. You're not imagining things. You're just selectively noticing them. This is why trends seem to explode overnight. You start hearing a song on the radio, seeing it on social media, and overhearing people talk about it. It feels like everyone is obsessed. In reality, it was likely already popular. You just weren't paying attention before. Marketers and advertisers exploit this effect constantly. They make products visible across multiple platforms. You see an ad for a new phone, then a coworker mentions it, then you spot it in someone's hand. Now you assume it must be everywhere. But the truth is, your brain is just filtering for it, making it seem more prevalent than it really is. The Baader-Meinhof phenomenon also plays a role in personal beliefs. Someone starts researching conspiracy theories, and suddenly they see evidence everywhere. Or someone believes a certain political narrative, and they start noticing every news story that supports it, while ignoring contradictory ones. The effect reinforces biases, making it feel like the world is confirming your views, when in fact your brain is just filtering selectively. It can even influence relationships. You develop a crush on someone, and suddenly you notice how often they walk by, how frequently they mention shared interests, how many signs seem to point to fate. But in reality, you were just blind to these details before. Understanding the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is important because it reminds us what we notice isn't necessarily what has changed. Our awareness has changed. So next time you feel like something is suddenly everywhere, pause and ask, has the world changed or has my attention shifted? This awareness helps you separate coincidence from reality and prevents you from falling into the illusion that something is more common, important, or meaningful than it actually is. The halo effect. A person walks into a room, radiating confidence, dressed immaculately, with a warm, charismatic smile. Instantly, without knowing anything else about them, your mind starts filling in the blanks. You assume they must be intelligent, competent, kind, and even successful. This is the halo effect, a powerful psychological bias where one positive trait, such as physical attractiveness or confidence, influences how we perceive all someone's other qualities, even if we have no real evidence. The halo effect explains why attractive people are often assumed to be smarter, more talented, or more capable than they actually are. Studies show that individuals perceived as physically attractive are more likely to get hired, more likely to receive promotions, and even more likely to receive lighter sentences in court. When someone looks the part, our brains unconsciously assign them other positive characteristics. But this effect isn't just about appearance. A person who speaks eloquently is often assumed to be intelligent. A confident speaker in a meeting is seen as more competent than someone who's quiet or hesitant, even if their ideas are no better. A celebrity who does charity work is perceived as morally good, even if their private life is a complete mess. Marketers use the halo effect to shape our perception of brands. If a luxury fashion brand is known for quality, people assume all their products, even their accessories or perfumes, must be top tier, even if they are no better than cheaper alternatives. If a car company produces one successful model, consumers often assume the entire lineup must be just as reliable. The halo effect also extends into education and leadership. Teachers tend to rate students they find pleasant or well-behaved as smarter than their peers, even if test scores suggest otherwise. Charismatic leaders gain trust more easily, even when their decision-making isn't necessarily better. Once the halo effect is in place, it becomes self-reinforcing. When someone is perceived positively, people interpret their actions in a favorable light. If an admired celebrity makes a controversial statement, fans are more likely to defend or rationalize it. If an attractive coworker makes a mistake, others might excuse it as an accident. But if a less likable colleague makes the same error, they may be criticized instead. To avoid falling into the halo effect, it's important to pause and ask, am I judging this person's abilities based on real evidence, or am I being influenced by one standout trait? Recognizing this bias allows you to see people more objectively, rather than letting one positive characteristic shape your entire perception of them. The horn effect. The horn effect is the dark mirror of the halo effect. Instead of one positive trait making a person seem better than they are, one negative trait makes them seem far worse. This means that if someone makes a bad first impression, dresses poorly, or has an unlikable personality trait, our brains tend to assume everything else about them is negative, even when there's no real reason to think so. Imagine walking into a job interview. The interviewer notices that your shirt is wrinkled. Even though your skills and experience are strong, they might unconsciously assume you're careless or unprofessional. The horn effect is why people who speak with hesitation or lack confidence are often perceived as less competent, even if their ideas are great. This effect plays out in countless ways. If a student is disruptive in class, teachers may assume they're not intelligent, even if they perform well on exams. If a customer service employee has a slightly rude tone, the customer might assume the entire company offers poor service. If a public figure is caught in one scandal, their entire career is often judged harshly, even if they had decades of positive contributions before that. The horn effect also shapes social and professional relationships. If someone is seen as unfriendly or awkward, people may assume they lack intelligence or competence, even if they're highly skilled. If an employee makes one mistake, their boss might suddenly see them as unreliable, despite a strong track record. It even affects how the media portrays people. If a news outlet presents someone in a negative light, audiences tend to accept that version without question, rarely asking if there's more to the story. A politician caught in a single embarrassing moment might be branded as incompetent, even if their track record is strong. Just like the halo effect, the horn effect creates self-fulfilling prophecies. When someone is perceived negatively, others treat them with skepticism or hostility. That treatment can lead them to act defensively or underperform, which then reinforces the negative perception. A student unfairly labeled as lazy might stop trying in school because they feel judged. A misunderstood coworker might withdraw socially, which only strengthens the belief that they are unfriendly. To counteract the horn effect, it's important to recognize when we're judging someone too harshly based on a single negative trait. Instead of letting one bad impression cloud your judgment, take a step back and ask, am I making assumptions about this person's character or abilities based on limited information? Separating perception from reality helps ensure that people are judged fairly and aren't defined by one mistake, flaw, or unfavorable characteristic. Both the halo effect and the horn effect show how first impressions and singular traits can shape our entire view of someone. Understanding these biases allows us to make more rational judgments and ensures we don't unfairly elevate or diminish someone based on things that may not reflect their true abilities or character. The bystander effect. In moments of crisis, we like to believe that if someone needed help, people around them would step in. But in reality, the more people there are, the less likely anyone is to take action. This is the bystander effect, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to help in an emergency if others are present, simply because they assume someone else will. This effect was famously demonstrated in the tragic case of Kitty Genovese in 1964. She was attacked outside her apartment in New York City, and although dozens of people reportedly saw or heard what was happening, no one intervened in time. When asked why they didn't help, many bystanders said they assumed someone else would. This case sparked research into what prevents people from taking action when help is needed. And it led to the discovery of two major psychological forces: diffusion of responsibility, social influence. Diffusion of responsibility means the more people there are, the less responsibility any single person feels to act. If you are the only witness to an accident, you'd likely feel compelled to help. But if you're part of a large crowd, your brain assumes someone else is more qualified or more responsible. And as a result, no one does anything. Social influence adds to the problem. In a group, people often look to others for cues on how to behave. If no one else seems alarmed, we hesitate, assuming there's no real emergency. This hesitation creates a cycle, each person waiting for someone else to act, and in the process, no one moves. The bystander effect is common in group settings, from workplace harassment, public altercations, to something as small as littering. If an employee is being mistreated, coworkers may hesitate to speak up, thinking someone else will. In public conflicts, onlookers often freeze, no one wanting to be the first to intervene. Even with something simple, like seeing trash on the ground, if no one else picks it up, people assume it's not their responsibility. So how do we overcome the bystander effect? It starts by breaking the mental barrier. If you're in an emergency and need help, single out one person instead of appealing to the group. Instead of shouting, "Somebody call an ambulance," point to someone and say, "You call an ambulance." This eliminates confusion and forces responsibility onto a specific individual. If you are a bystander, remind yourself, just because others aren't helping doesn't mean you shouldn't. Taking the first step often creates a ripple effect. Once one person acts, others are far more likely to follow. The key to breaking the bystander effect is simple. Don't assume someone else will step up because everyone else is thinking the same thing. Social proof. People don't like to be the first to do something, but if they see others doing it, suddenly it feels safe, acceptable, and even desirable. This is social proof, a psychological phenomenon where people tend to follow the actions of the crowd, especially when they're unsure of what to do. This effect explains why laughter tracks in sitcoms make jokes seem funnier. Long lines outside restaurants make them appear better, and why viral trends explode seemingly overnight. When people are uncertain, they look to others for guidance, assuming that if a lot of people are doing something, it must be the right thing to do. Marketers and businesses use social proof to influence consumer behavior. If you visit a website and see over 1 million customers have bought this product, it instantly makes the item seem more valuable. Customer reviews, testimonials, and influencer endorsements all tap into this principle. People are more likely to trust a product if they see that others have already approved of it. But social proof isn't just about purchases. It shapes opinions, behaviors, and even moral judgments. If you enter a new workplace and see that no one speaks up in meetings, you'll likely follow that behavior, assuming it's the norm. If you see a group of people looking up at the sky, you'll probably look up too, just to see what they're looking at. The desire to conform is deeply embedded in human psychology, and this effect becomes even stronger in uncertain situations. If a fire alarm goes off and no one reacts, others assume it's a false alarm. But if one person runs for the exit, the entire crowd is more likely to follow. Social proof can also be used for manipulation. Fake reviews, bot-generated comments, staged popularity. All of these can make something seem more successful than it really is. Some businesses pay for fake lines outside their stores to create the illusion of high demand. Political campaigns use mass rallies to generate the appearance of widespread support. The more people see others engaged, the more they believe they should be too. While social proof can be useful, helping people make decisions quickly, it's important to recognize when you're being influenced. Ask yourself, am I doing this because I truly want to, or just because I see others doing it? Being aware of social proof allows you to make decisions based on logic, rather than just following the crowd. Both the bystander effect and social proof reveal how deeply group behavior influences individual decisions. One causes inaction, the other drives conformity. Understanding these effects allows you to break free from automatic reactions and make decisions that align with your own judgment, rather than just going along with the group. The mere exposure effect. Familiarity breeds comfort. The more we see, hear, or experience something, the more we tend to like it, even if we were indifferent or skeptical at first. This is the mere exposure effect, a psychological phenomenon where repeated exposure to something increases our preference for it. It's why songs that initially seemed average start to sound good after a few listens. Certain brands feel more trustworthy simply because we see them often. And even faces of strangers start to seem friendlier over time. This effect was first studied by psychologist Robert Zeigarnik in the 1960s. He conducted experiments showing that people who were repeatedly exposed to unfamiliar stimuli, like nonsense words, geometric shapes, or random faces, began to like them more simply because they'd seen them multiple times. The key takeaway? Familiarity creates preference, even when there's no logical reason for it. Marketers and advertisers rely on this effect heavily. That's why companies flood you with ads, not just to sell you something, but to make the brand feel familiar and therefore likable. Political campaigns do the same. Repeat a candidate's name or slogan enough times, and it starts to feel acceptable, even to people who were initially indifferent. The mere exposure effect influences our social lives too. People tend to like others more, simply because they see them often. This explains why coworkers or classmates we barely noticed eventually start to feel like friends. The more we interact with someone, the more our brain categorizes them as safe and familiar, increasing our natural affinity for them. This effect even shapes romantic attraction. Studies show that proximity plays a major role in relationships. People are more likely to form bonds with those they encounter frequently, at work, at the gym, or even on social media. The repeated exposure builds a sense of connection, even if there was no initial attraction. But the mere exposure effect has its limits. If exposure happens too quickly or aggressively, it can backfire, leading to boredom or annoyance. That's why catchy songs played everywhere can become irritating. Overplayed ads feel intrusive, and someone texting too frequently can come across as clingy rather than endearing. Understanding this effect can help us shape our habits. Trying to develop a taste for something new, like a hobby, a genre of music, or even a healthy food, you don't have to force yourself to love it instantly. Exposure alone can shift your preferences over time. On the flip side, if you're being influenced by repetitive messaging, take a moment to step back and ask, do I actually like this? Or do I just feel familiar with it? Recognizing the mere exposure effect helps you make more conscious decisions, whether you're building a new interest or guarding against influence by repetition. Cognitive dissonance. People like to believe they are logical and consistent in their thoughts and actions. But when reality contradicts those beliefs, an uncomfortable tension arises. This is cognitive dissonance, the mental discomfort that occurs when we hold two conflicting ideas at the same time, or when our actions contradict our values. To reduce this discomfort, the brain works to resolve the conflict, often by changing our beliefs or justifying our behavior in ways that might not be entirely rational. Imagine a smoker who knows smoking is bad for their health. This knowledge contradicts their behavior, creating cognitive dissonance. To resolve it, they might tell themselves, lots of people smoke and live long lives. I only smoke socially, so it's not that bad. Instead of changing the habit, they adjust their thinking to reduce the internal conflict. This effect happens constantly in daily life. If someone spends a lot of money on an expensive but disappointing purchase, they might convince themselves it was a great investment. Not because it's true, but because admitting they wasted money feels worse. If a person stays in a bad relationship, they might justify it with, we've been together for so long, it would be wrong to leave now. Even if they're unhappy, their brain rewrites the narrative to maintain psychological comfort. Cognitive dissonance becomes especially strong when a person's identity is at stake. If someone believes they are a generous person but refuses to donate to charity, they may downplay the importance of generosity or say that specific charity doesn't deserve my help. Their mind works to defend their self-image, even if it means bending reality. This principle also explains why changing deeply held beliefs is so difficult. When people encounter evidence that contradicts their worldview, their brain often rejects it, not because the facts are wrong, but because the truth feels too uncomfortable. Someone who strongly believes in a conspiracy theory won't abandon it just because they see contradictory facts. Instead, they'll say, "That's just what they want us to think." Their mind protects them from the discomfort of being wrong. Marketers, politicians, and even cult leaders exploit cognitive dissonance regularly. If someone is persuaded to take a small action, like signing a petition or trying a product for free, they begin to see themselves as someone who supports that cause or brand. Later, when they're asked to donate money or make a purchase, they're more likely to say yes, to stay consistent with their previous actions. So how do we overcome cognitive dissonance? It begins with self-awareness. When you feel defensive or uncomfortable about a decision, ask yourself, am I justifying this because I truly believe it, or because I don't want to feel wrong? The ability to recognize and challenge cognitive dissonance leads to more honest thinking and smarter decision-making. Both the mere exposure effect and cognitive dissonance reveal how subtle psychological forces shape our thoughts and behaviors. One makes us like things simply because we encounter them frequently. The other pushes us to justify our choices, even when they conflict with logic. Understanding these effects helps us become more mindful of what we believe, why we believe it, and when it might be time to reevaluate our thinking. The Pygmalion Effect. Expectations shape reality. When people are expected to perform well, they often rise to meet those expectations, even if they wouldn't have otherwise. This is the Pygmalion Effect, a psychological phenomenon where high expectations from others lead to better performance, increased motivation, and greater success. Named after the myth of Pygmalion, a sculptor who created a statue so beautiful it came to life, the effect highlights the power of belief. When a teacher believes a student is gifted, when a coach believes an athlete is talented, when a boss believes an employee has great potential, their belief alone can enhance performance. The individual begins to internalize these high expectations, putting in more effort, feeling more confident, and ultimately producing better results. One of the most famous studies on the Pygmalion Effect was conducted in 1968 by psychologists Robert Rosenthal and Lenore Jacobson. They told teachers that certain students had been identified as academic bloomers, who were expected to show exceptional progress. But in reality, those students were chosen randomly. By the end of the school year, the students labeled as high potential performed significantly better than their peers. The only difference? Their teachers believed in them. That belief subtly influenced how the teachers treated them, offering more encouragement, more attention, more challenges, all of which helped the students excel. The Pygmalion Effect isn't limited to education. It exists in the workplace as well. When managers have high expectations for their employees, those employees tend to perform better, take on more responsibility, and develop stronger skills. Leaders who show faith in their teams create a cycle of growth. Employees work harder because they feel valued, and as a result, their actual capabilities improve. Even in personal relationships, this effect is at play. If a parent consistently tells a child, "You are capable and intelligent," the child is more likely to believe it and act accordingly. If a friend constantly encourages someone's goals, that support boosts confidence and motivation. The way others perceive us directly shapes how we perceive ourselves. And the Pygmalion Effect isn't just external, it can also be self-directed. If you set higher expectations for yourself, you are more likely to push beyond limitations. Believing you're capable of learning a new skill, achieving a goal, or handling a challenge changes how you approach it. You act with conviction, and that increases the likelihood of success. Understanding the Pygmalion Effect allows you to harness it in your own life. If you want to improve someone's performance, whether it's an employee, student, friend, or even yourself, set high but realistic expectations and express genuine belief in their potential. Because when people feel that someone believes in them, they become more motivated to live up to that belief. The Golem Effect. Just as high expectations can improve performance, low expectations can sabotage it. This is the Golem Effect, the dark counterpart to the Pygmalion Effect. When people are expected to perform poorly, they often do not because they are less capable, but because low expectations become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Why? Because those expectations reduce confidence, limit effort, and quietly push people toward failure. The name comes from the mythical golem, a creature formed from clay, symbolizing brute force and mindless obedience. In psychology, the golem represents something different: negative expectations that shape outcomes and drag down performance. This effect has been repeatedly proven, especially in education. When teachers believe certain students are less capable, they unconsciously offer less attention, fewer opportunities, and lower encouragement. As a result, the students perform worse, not because they lack ability, but because they were expected to fail. The same thing happens in the workplace. If an employee senses their manager doubts them, they begin to hesitate in decision-making, avoid new challenges, and underperform even if fully capable. Why does this happen? Because doubt, even unspoken, shows up in subtle ways. Less eye contact, fewer assignments, lack of constructive feedback. These nonverbal cues send one message: you're not good enough. Eventually, the employee begins to believe it. The Golem Effect also seeps into social and personal relationships. If a child is constantly told, "You're not smart enough," or "You're not athletic," they begin to internalize those labels and stop trying altogether. In friendships, families, and romantic partnerships, someone who is made to feel incompetent will often withdraw, lose confidence, and fail in areas where they could have thrived. What makes the Golem Effect so dangerous is that it often goes unnoticed. It's not open criticism, it's quiet absence. No encouragement, no belief, no support. Over time, that silence whispers, "You're not capable," and eventually the person listens. So how do we break the Golem Effect? The answer: conscious rejection of low expectations. If you feel boxed in by work, school, or your personal life, ask yourself, am I really incapable, or have I just absorbed someone else's doubt? Self-awareness is key. Surround yourself with people who believe in your growth. And most importantly, believe in yourself, even when others don't. For leaders, teachers, and mentors, the lesson is clear. Wherein, be mindful of the expectations you set. Even if someone struggles, reinforce belief in their potential. Encourage effort, not just results. Promote growth, not labels. And never underestimate the power of your belief in someone. The Pygmalion Effect lifts people up. The Golem Effect holds them down. Both prove one powerful truth: expectations shape reality. So set expectations that inspire, not ones that limit. The spotlight effect. People tend to believe they are the center of attention, assuming others notice their every flaw, mistake, or awkward moment. But in reality, most people are far too focused on themselves to pay much attention to you. This is the spotlight effect, a psychological phenomenon where we overestimate how much others notice our actions, appearance, or behavior. Imagine this. You spill coffee on your shirt right before a big meeting. You walk in convinced everyone is staring at the stain, judging you silently. But the truth? Most people don't notice at all. And if they do, they forget about it almost instantly. What feels like a major embarrassment to you is barely a blip on anyone else's radar. This was confirmed in a famous study by psychologists Thomas Ilovich and Kenneth Savitsky. Participants were asked to wear an embarrassing t-shirt featuring Barry Manilow's face into a room full of people. They were then asked to estimate how many noticed. Their guess? Most of the room. The reality? Only a small fraction did. The study revealed a core truth. We believe others are watching and judging us, far more than they actually are. And then the spotlight effect happens because of egocentrism, or just we view the world from our own perspective and assume others are doing the same. But in social situations, everyone else is busy thinking about themselves, their own flaws, worries, and insecurities. This effect fuels social anxiety. It's the reason people avoid speaking up, don't dance in public, hesitate to wear something bold. They fear being judged, even though most people won't remember their actions a few minutes later. It also applies to the past. We obsess over embarrassing moments from years ago, believing others still remember. But the reality? They don't. Understanding the spotlight effect is liberating. It means you can make mistakes, you can express yourself, you can take social risks, all without the pressure of being under constant observation. So the next time you feel self-conscious, ask yourself, is anyone really paying that much attention? Most likely they're not. And those who do notice, they'll forget by tomorrow. When you stop worrying about what others think, you free yourself to live with more confidence and ease. The Pratfall Effect. Making a small, harmless mistake can actually make people like you more. This is known as the Pratfall Effect, a psychological phenomenon where someone who appears competent becomes more relatable, likable, and even charming when they show a small flaw. This concept was first studied by psychologist Elliot Aronson. In his experiment, participants listened to recordings of two people answering trivia questions. One answered almost everything correctly. The other made a few minor mistakes. In some versions, the near-perfect person spilled coffee on themselves at the end. The result? People liked that person more after the mistake. They seemed more human and more approachable. Why does this happen? Because perfection is intimidating. We admire those who are skilled, but when someone seems too flawless, they can feel distant or unrelatable. A small human mistake breaks that wall. It makes them feel real. That's why celebrities who laugh at themselves or share awkward moments are adored. And why public figures who try too hard to maintain a perfect image often come off as arrogant or fake. The Pratfall Effect is why. A leader who stumbles over their words and laughs it off feels more engaging than one who speaks perfectly but coldly. A job candidate who acknowledges a minor flaw with confidence comes across as more genuine and likable. In dating, someone who tells a goofy story often seems more attractive than someone who tries to be flawlessly cool. But there's a catch. The Pratfall Effect only works if you're already perceived as competent. If someone is struggling in their role and makes a mistake, it can reinforce negative impressions instead of helping. The key is balance. Be good at what you do, but also comfortable enough to show that you're human. The takeaway? Don't be afraid to be imperfect. A small mistake doesn't damage your image. It can strengthen it. Embracing the Pratfall Effect means letting go of perfection, being authentic, and knowing that a little clumsiness can make you a lot more likable. Fear of missing out, FOMO. The psychological effect that makes people feel uneasy, restless, and even impulsive when they believe others are experiencing something valuable that they are not. FOMO is one of the strongest motivators of human behavior. It's why people refresh social media obsessively, why they impulsively buy products just because everyone else has them, and why they say yes to plans even when they'd rather stay home. The fear that others are gaining experiences, status, or advantages without us creates urgency, a deep primal discomfort. Social media amplifies FOMO dramatically. Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, these platforms flood us with highlight reels, vacations, parties, success, new purchases. Logically, we know it's curated, but emotionally, it feels like everyone is living a better life. Marketers exploit FOMO relentlessly. Phrases like limited time offer, only 2 left in stock, join 1,000 plus others, trigger urgency and scarcity. People buy not out of need, but out of fear. Fear of being left behind. Finance and investing play on FOMO too. People rush into cryptocurrency or stocks, not because they understand them, but because they don't want to miss potential profits. You know, the root of FOMO is social belonging. In ancient times, missing out meant isolation or even death. That survival instinct still lingers. So today, even missing a trivial event can trigger deep anxiety. But FOMO has a cost. It leads to stress, burnout, and decision fatigue. You say yes to everything and stretch yourself thin. Even worse, you stop enjoying the moment you're in because you're thinking about the one you're not in. The antidote. JOMO, the joy of missing out. JOMO means embracing your own choices. Instead of worrying about what you're missing, you focus on what matters to you. Ask yourself, do I really want this, or am I just afraid of missing out? If it's the latter, let it go. You'll find more peace in intentional living than in chasing every trend, event, or opportunity. The Hedonic Treadmill. Why does happiness never seem to last? It's because of one powerful psychological force: adaptation. When the hedonic treadmill, you keep moving, chasing happiness, but never really get anywhere. It's why material possessions lose their appeal over time, why the joy of a promotion fades after a few weeks, why long-term relationships often lose the initial intensity. You get used to the new baseline, so you crave the next high. Consumerism thrives on this cycle. Advertisers promise that happiness lies in the next thing: the latest phone, a bigger house, a better car. But once you get it, your brain adapts. The thrill wears off, and the wanting begins again. This treadmill isn't just about highs. It also explains why people recover from lows. Resilience is baked into your psychology. Heartbreaks, failures, disappointments. They feel devastating at first, but over time, your emotional state returns to normal. Neither extreme joy nor deep sorrow lasts forever. The mind is incredibly adaptive. So if happiness always resets, how do you break free? The answer isn't accumulation, it's appreciation. Gratitude slows adaptation. Actively recognizing and valuing what you already have makes happiness last longer. Instead of chasing the next achievement, focus on the present. Savor it. Celebrate it. True contentment comes from perspective, not possession. When you stop waiting for the next thing to make you happy and start enjoying what you have now, that's when you step off the treadmill and into real, lasting peace. Loss aversion. Losing $100 hurts more than winning $100 feels good. Gee, that's the core of loss aversion. It's a psychological principle that explains why we're more motivated to avoid losses than to chase equal gains. And Amos Tversky. Loss aversion shows that human decisions are driven more by fear than logic. We're wired to avoid loss even at the cost of missing out. This is why gamblers remember their losses more vividly than their wins. Investors hold on to bad stocks, hoping they'll bounce back. People stay in failing situations because quitting feels like losing. One classic example is the sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested time, money, or effort, so you keep going, even if it's clearly not worth it. You stay in a bad relationship. Keep watching a boring movie. Finish a project you hate. Why? Because quitting feels like losing, even though walking away would be smarter. Marketers know this and use it. Only 3 left in stock. Sale ends at midnight. Try it free for 7 days. These tricks trigger fear of loss, pushing you to act not because you need the product, but because you fear losing the chance. Loss aversion shows up everywhere. Employees stay in jobs they hate. Athletes refuse to retire. People hold on to relationships out of fear, not love. All because losing what we already have feels unbearable. So how do you overcome loss aversion? You reframe it. Instead of asking, "What do I lose if I let go?" ask, "What might I gain?" Most losses aren't endings. They're transitions, open doors disguised as closed ones. The pain of losing is real, but it's also exaggerated by your brain. When you recognize that, you can stop letting fear make your decisions and start making smarter, braver ones instead. 1. The Endowment Effect. Have you ever tried selling something you own, only to feel like everyone is lowballing you? That's the Endowment Effect, a cognitive bias where people overvalue things simply because they own them. It could be an old car, a piece of furniture, or even just an idea. Because it's yours, you believe it's worth more than it actually is, even when the market says otherwise. This effect was first studied by psychologist Richard Thaler. In his research, participants were given a coffee mug. Later, they were asked how much they'd sell it for. Surprisingly, they wanted more money than they would have paid if they didn't already own it. Ownership created value, even when the object didn't change. The Endowment Effect helps explain why people struggle to get rid of clutter, why that drawer full of old gadgets still exists, and why selling your used car feels personal, even when it's just business. Parting with your stuff feels like a loss, even when it logically isn't. This bias also skews negotiations. Sellers ask for more than buyers are willing to pay because they believe their possessions are uniquely valuable. But buyers, they just see a car, a couch, a pair of shoes. Marketers know this and use it. Free trials, test drives, try before you buy. These aren't just nice gestures. They're psychological hooks. Because once you've owned something even briefly, it feels harder to let go. That's why companies offer free returns. Because they know, if it feels like it's already yours, you probably won't send it back. And this effect goes beyond physical things. People overvalue their own ideas, defend their own projects, and cling to their opinions even in the face of better ones. Why? Because letting go feels like giving up part of themselves. So how do you overcome the Endowment Effect? Ask yourself, if this wasn't mine, how much would I really value it? That one mental shift can make a huge difference. It helps you declutter more easily, negotiate more fairly, and even rethink your long-held beliefs with clearer judgment. Together with loss aversion, the Endowment Effect shows how emotional attachment distorts rational thinking. But when you recognize the bias, you gain the power to make smarter, lighter, more objective decisions. The Dunning-Kruger Effect. Have you ever met someone who's shockingly bad at something, but somehow completely convinced they're amazing? Or someone who's brilliant, yet constantly doubts their own abilities? That's the Dunning-Kruger Effect, a psychological phenomenon where incompetent people overestimate themselves, while highly skilled individuals underestimate their own abilities. This was first studied in 1999 by psychologists David Dunning and Justin Kruger. They discovered a surprising truth. The less people know, the more likely they are to believe they're experts. Why? Because low-skill individuals lack the self-awareness to recognize their own mistakes. They don't know what they don't know, so they assume they've mastered the subject. Meanwhile, truly skilled people have a deeper understanding of the subject, realize how much more there is to learn, and often downplay their expertise because it feels ordinary to them. This is why some of the most confident people are often the least competent. They mistake surface-level knowledge for mastery, like someone who watches a few games and suddenly thinks they can coach a professional team, or someone who skims an article and suddenly claims to understand economics, politics, or medicine. On the other hand, experts tend to doubt themselves. They think, if this is easy for me, it must be easy for everyone. That's not modesty, that's expertise mistaking itself for common sense. The Dunning-Kruger effect shows up everywhere. In workplaces, where loud confidence can overshadow quiet competence. In politics, where the most certain voices are often the least informed. And on social media, where people argue complex topics with barely any real knowledge. This effect also explains why some people reject expert advice. They believe they know just as much as someone who's spent decades studying the subject. It's a dangerous illusion. Because when unqualified people feel confident, they can make poor decisions, mislead others, or even rise to leadership positions, despite lacking the skills needed. Meanwhile, the truly knowledgeable, they often hold back, quietly doubting themselves. So how do we overcome the Dunning-Kruger effect? Through self-awareness and continuous learning. Ask yourself, am I confident because I actually know the topic? Or because I don't know enough to see how complex it really is? And if you're someone who doubts yourself, take comfort in this. Your self-doubt might be the most reliable sign of real competence. The smartest people never stop questioning, and that's what makes them wise. The false consensus effect. Have you ever been shocked when someone disagrees with something you thought was obviously true? That's the false consensus effect, a cognitive bias where we overestimate how many people share our beliefs, opinions, and behaviors. Humans naturally assume their way of thinking is normal. If you love a certain type of music, you probably assume most people do too. If you hold strong political views, you likely think most reasonable people agree with you. If you laugh at a joke, you expect others to laugh too, and feel confused when they don't. Why does this happen? Because we use ourselves as the default reference point. We assume what's obvious or acceptable to us must be obvious or acceptable to others. And we rarely challenge that belief because we mostly surround ourselves with like-minded people. Our friends often think like us. Our online communities reinforce our views. Even our workplaces can be echo chambers. So we get a false sense of agreement, believing our opinions are shared by the majority, when in fact they might be very niche. This bias causes problems. It creates social misunderstandings when we assume people think like us and they don't. It fuels ideological divides because we believe our side is more popular and obvious than it really is. And it makes us less open to other perspectives because we think ours is the only rational one. The false consensus effect also affects decision-making. Business leaders might assume customers want something because they do. Politicians may overestimate public support for a policy because their advisors agree with it. Employers might, because no one complains even if many people feel silent and dissatisfied. Surprisingly, this bias goes beyond opinions. It affects morality too. If you believe cheating is wrong, you assume most people feel the same. If you would cheat in a situation, you assume others would too. We project our values onto others, and that often leads to misjudging them. So how do you counter the false consensus effect? You seek out other perspectives. Ask yourself, do most people actually think this way? Or am I just surrounded by people who agree with me? Expose yourself to diverse viewpoints. It helps correct the illusion of consensus and gives you a more accurate understanding of the world. The false consensus effect, alongside the Dunning-Kruger effect, reveals how easily we misjudge both ourselves and others. One makes us overconfident in our abilities. The other makes us overconfident in our beliefs' popularity. Recognizing these biases leads to humility, curiosity, and most importantly, open-mindedness. And in a world full of complexity, those traits matter more than ever. The just world hypothesis. We want to believe the world is fair, that good things happen to good people, and bad things happen to those who deserve it. This belief feels comforting, but it's a cognitive bias, one that leads to dangerous thinking. The just world hypothesis is the idea that life operates on a system of justice, where effort is rewarded and wrongdoing is punished. It's a deeply rooted human belief because it gives us a sense of order and control. If I do the right things, I'll be okay. If someone's suffering, they must have done something wrong. But reality isn't that simple. Bad things happen to good people, and good things happen to people who cut corners, cheat, or hurt others. That's an uncomfortable truth. So instead of accepting it, people rationalize unfairness. Someone loses their job? They probably didn't work hard enough. A person is scammed? They should have been more careful. A victim is assaulted. Why were they wearing that? Why were they even there? This is victim blaming, an attempt to protect ourselves from the terrifying idea that bad luck, cruelty, or injustice could happen to anyone, including us. The just world hypothesis doesn't just affect how we view suffering, it also distorts how we see success. We assume wealthy, successful people earned everything through hard work and merit. And those who struggle, they must be lazy. They made bad choices. But that's not always true. Privilege, luck, systemic inequality, these all play major roles in where people end up. This bias also shapes social and political beliefs. Those who believe the world is fundamentally fair are less likely to support welfare programs, social justice movements, or policies that help the disadvantaged. They assume people are where they deserve to be. But in truth, many are held back by barriers they never chose. So how do we overcome the just world bias? By recognizing this, life isn't always fair. People's circumstances are shaped by more than just choices. And sometimes people suffer for no reason at all. Instead of asking, what did they do to deserve this? Ask, what might have happened beyond their control? What support could they need? Rejecting the just world hypothesis doesn't mean giving up on fairness. It means committing to real fairness rooted in empathy, understanding, and action. Because the world isn't always just, but we can be. The placebo effect. Sometimes just believing something will help actually makes it help, even when it doesn't do anything at all. That's the placebo effect, a powerful psychological phenomenon where expectations alone trigger real physical or mental improvements. The classic example? Medicine. A patient takes a sugar pill, thinking it's a real drug, and suddenly their pain fades, their anxiety eases, or their symptoms improve. But there's no medicine in the pill. It's belief that's doing the healing. What's happening here? The brain steps in, releasing endorphins, reducing stress, and even changing physiological responses. In conditions like chronic pain, depression, and some neurological disorders, placebos have shown results that rival real medication. Yeah, sometimes the healing continues for weeks, even without any active ingredient, and it goes beyond medicine. Athletes who think they've taken a performance booster can actually run faster or lift heavier, even if it was just a sugar pill. People who believe they slept well perform better and feel more rested, even if they barely slept. The mind convinces the body that change is happening, and the body responds. Even when people know it's a placebo, the effect still works. Just taking a pill going through the ritual of healing can trigger a response. It's not about the substance. It's about belief. But there's a dark side too, the Nocebo Effect. Just as positive expectations heal, negative expectations can harm. Tell someone a pill has side effects, and they might experience them, even if it's just a sugar pill. If someone believes they're allergic to something, their body may react, even when no allergen is present. Fear, expectation, belief. They all shape physical reality. Marketers know this well. That's why luxury products feel better. Expensive better is a placebo. High-end packaging, fancy branding, exclusive pricing, all boost perceived quality, even when the product is no different. So how can you use the placebo effect in your own life? Simple. Believe in your ability to improve. Positive expectations lead to real results. Visualize success, trust the process, and remind yourself that progress is possible. Because when the mind believes, the body often follows. But stay mindful. False beliefs can hold you back. Fear, doubt, and misinformation can create real limits. And remember, not everything premium is better. Sometimes it's just clever packaging. The placebo effect reveals this simple truth: belief shapes reality. Just like the just world hypothesis convinces people that life is always fair, the placebo effect shows how powerful expectation truly is. When you combine critical thinking with positive belief, you unlock the ability to choose what shapes you, instead of being blindly shaped by it. The nocebo effect. Just as belief in healing can help the body, belief in harm can hurt it. This is the nocebo effect, a psychological phenomenon where expecting something negative makes it more likely to happen. While the placebo effect tricks the brain into healing, the nocebo effect does the opposite. It convinces the body that something is wrong, even when nothing actually is. This is most commonly seen in medicine. If a doctor warns that a drug has side effects, patients may start experiencing them, even if they're only taking a sugar pill. In clinical trials, participants given harmless placebos report real symptoms: headaches, nausea, fatigue, all because they expected them. The belief alone triggered their response. But the nocebo effect goes beyond medicine. It happens every day. If you're told a long flight will leave you drained, you're more likely to feel exhausted, even if you slept well. If you expect a certain food will upset your stomach, you might feel nauseous, even if it's completely safe. If someone says the room contains an allergen, some people start sneezing or wheezing, even when there's nothing there. Fear and anxiety feed this effect. The more you worry about pain or sickness, the more your brain primes your body to feel it. Stress floods your system. Pain sensitivity rises. Immune response weakens. And even small discomforts start to feel unbearable. Marketers use this too. Ads amplify fears of aging, illness, inadequacy, just to sell solutions. Skincare commercials highlight wrinkles you hadn't even noticed. News outlets exaggerate health scares that make people panic into imagining symptoms. Fear becomes profit. Anxiety becomes currency. So how do you fight the nocebo effect? Awareness. If you start feeling worse after hearing about a symptom, ask yourself, is this real or is this expectation at work? When someone makes a negative prediction, don't absorb it. Shift your focus to neutral or positive possibilities. Because the mind is powerful, and it doesn't just respond to reality. It responds to what you believe about reality. By becoming more mindful of how belief shapes your body, you protect yourself from unnecessary suffering. The placebo effect shows how belief can heal. The nocebo effect shows how belief can hurt. Both are reminders. Your thoughts are not just passive. They are active forces, shaping what you feel, how you heal, and how you live. The ostrich effect. When people don't want to deal with something hard, they look away, pretend it's not there, convince themselves, if I don't see the problem, maybe it doesn't exist. That's the ostrich effect, a psychological bias where people avoid negative information to reduce stress in the short term, even if it makes things worse in the long run. The name comes from the myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand to hide from danger. They don't, but humans do all the time. When the credit card bill is too high, people avoid checking it. When the test result might bring bad news, they put off the appointment. When a relationship is falling apart, they pretend everything's fine. Avoidance gives relief, but only for a moment. In finance, it's common. People ignore their bank balance after overspending. Investors refuse to check portfolios during crashes. They hope if they don't look, the losses won't be real. But the damage keeps growing. In health, it's the same. Strange symptoms are brushed off. Checkups are delayed. Unhealthy habits are ignored. Why? Because the truth is scary. and ignoring it feels easier until it's too late. In relationships, people avoid hard conversations. They fear conflict, so they stay silent. But silence builds walls, and unresolved issues turn into distance, resentment, and sometimes collapse. The Ostrich Effect even plays out on a global scale. Climate change, economic instability, political division. Many choose denial over discomfort. They hope the problems fix themselves. They rarely do. So how do you overcome the Ostrich Effect? You start by facing reality, even when it's uncomfortable. Instead of avoiding your finances, build a budget. Seek advice. Regain control. Instead of ignoring health concerns, get checked. Early action saves lives. Instead of dodging difficult conversations, speak up. Strengthen the connection through honesty. Facing the truth may feel painful, but ignoring it never solves it. The longer you run from a problem, the more power it gains. The sooner you face it, the sooner you can fix it. The Ostrich Effect says, look away. But wisdom says, look closer. That's how you reclaim peace, not by avoiding reality, but by meeting it head on. Hindsight bias. You see the result, and suddenly it all makes sense. Of course that team won. Of course the stock crashed. Of course that relationship ended. And you tell yourself, I knew it. But did you? This is hindsight bias, the illusion that past events were more predictable than they really were. It's your brain rewriting history to make the outcome feel inevitable. Before it happened, everything was uncertain. The signs were unclear. But after, it feels obvious. You connect the dots in reverse, erasing all the randomness and doubt that existed in the moment. This bias shows up everywhere. In finance, I knew that market would crash, but you didn't sell. You didn't hedge. You just remember it that way. In sports, of course they won, I felt it, but you weren't betting your savings on it. In relationships, I should have seen the breakup coming. But back then, you were planning a future. In politics, everyone knew how this would turn out. No, they didn't. Predictions were all over the place. Why does this happen? Because the brain hates randomness. It wants the world to feel logical, predictable, safe. So once you know the outcome, it rewires the past to make you think you saw it all along. But here's the danger. Hindsight bias makes you overconfident. You stop learning. You stop questioning. You think you're better at predicting the future than you really are. That leads to bad decisions. You repeat mistakes. You ignore warning signs. You judge others unfairly. They should have known better. When the truth is, no one really knows until it happens. So how do you break free? Write things down before they happen. Track your thoughts, your expectations, your predictions. Accept that luck plays a role. Not everything is the result of skill or foresight. And remember, just because something happened doesn't mean it was obvious. The truth is, most things only look clear in the rearview mirror. In that mirror, it's distorted. The IKEA Effect. Why do people love their wonky self-built furniture? Why does a slightly burnt homemade meal taste better than takeout? Why do we cling to our half-baked ideas like they're gold? It's because of this, the IKEA Effect. Named after the Swedish furniture giant, this psychological bias explains why we value things more. When we've put effort into creating them, even if the result isn't objectively better, you build a table. It's crooked. It wobbles. But to you, it's priceless. You didn't just assemble wood. You built value with your own effort. It's not just furniture. A meal you cooked yourself tastes better. A project you struggled through feels more meaningful. A business you built from scratch feels like part of you. The reason? Effort equals ownership. And ownership feels like value. Companies know this. Meal kits, DIY crafts, custom shoes. When you help build the product, You feel like it's yours, so you love it more, even if someone else could have made it faster or better. But the IKEA effect has a downside. It can blind us. You overvalue your own ideas. You resist feedback. You cling to projects that should have ended because you made them. It's emotional investment disguised as objective worth. This leads to stubbornness. You defend flawed work. You reject better options. You say, I put too much into this to walk away. That's not logic. That's ego. So how do you break free? Separate effort from outcome. Be open to feedback even when it stings. Ask yourself, if someone else made this, would I still think it's great? Because effort alone doesn't make something valuable. But knowing when to let go, that's real wisdom. Both hindsight bias and the IKEA effect show how your mind tricks you. One rewrites the past. The other overhypes your own work. Recognize them and you'll make better choices, with more clarity and less attachment. The curse of knowledge. Once you know something, it's nearly impossible to imagine not knowing it. That's the curse of knowledge, a cognitive bias that makes it hard for experts to explain things in a way beginners can understand. It's why teachers sometimes confuse students with explanations that make perfect sense to them. Professionals assume their jargon is basic knowledge. Why people overestimate how clearly others understand their ideas? Because here's what happens. Once you learn something, truly learn it, your brain rewires. The concept becomes automatic, natural, and you forget how confusing it once felt. Back in 1990, psychologist Elizabeth Newton ran an experiment. She asked participants to tap out the rhythm of well-known songs. They believed listeners would guess the tune half the time. But in reality, listeners got it right just 2.5% of the time. Why? Because the tappers could hear the melody in their heads, but all the listeners heard was tapping. That's the curse. Once you hear the music, you forget what it's like to only hear the noise. This bias appears everywhere. A programmer can't explain their code to a non-tech coworker. A manager gives vague instructions, assuming it's clear. A friend skips over the backstory, then wonders why you're confused. So how do you break the curse? 1. Step into a beginner's shoes. 2. Ask, if I didn't know this, what would confuse me? 3. Use simple language. 4. Test understanding, not just delivery, because what's obvious to you might be invisible to someone else. And the best communicators aren't the ones who know the most. They're the ones who remember what it was like not to know. The serial position effect. When you're given a list, say a shopping list, a string of names, or a speech, you'll remember two parts best, the beginning and the end. Everything in the middle, it fades fast. This is the serial position effect, a powerful memory bias shaped by two forces. 1. Primacy effect. The first items get the most attention and move to long-term memory. 2. Recency effect. The last items are freshest and stay in short-term memory. Try it right now. Think back to the first 5 movies you watched this year and the last 5. Now try remembering the ones in between. Harder, right? This effect shapes everything from grocery lists, lesson plans, speeches, advertisements, job interviews, even breakups. Smart marketers put the most important message first and last. Teachers do it too. Key points at the start of class and reinforced at the end. And in job interviews, being the first or final candidate gives you a mental edge. Middle slots are just harder to remember. Even in life, we remember the beginning of a vacation, but the days in the middle blur together. So when telling stories, hook them early and finish with impact, because attention doesn't stay steady. It peaks at the start and at the finish. The middle, it's forgettable unless you make it unforgettable. The serial position effect. How to use it. Want your message to stick? Structure matters. Whether you're writing, speaking, teaching, put your strongest points first and your most powerful points last. That's the serial position effect in action. Need to memorize something? Don't just repeat the beginning and the end. Focus extra effort on the middle. That's where memory fades fastest. Spaced repetition, chunking, or visual cues can make the forgotten middle unforgettable. This isn't just theory. It's a strategy for teaching, public speaking, making requests, studying. Use it, and your words won't just be heard, they'll be remembered. Linking it all together, both the curse of knowledge and the serial position effect reveal one simple truth. The brain doesn't process information equally. One bias makes it hard to teach, because you forget what it's like to be a beginner. The other makes some moments stick, and others fade away. But once you recognize these biases, you don't just communicate, you connect. You explain clearly. You teach effectively. You leave a lasting impression. So next time you speak, teach, or share an idea, ask yourself, am I assuming too much knowledge? And am I putting the right words in the right place? Because it's not just what you say, it's how you say it and where you say it. The frequency illusion. You learn a new word, and suddenly you hear it everywhere. You research a new car, and now it's on every street. You discover a new idea, and it shows up in conversations, books, even memes. Welcome to the frequency illusion, a brain trick where something feels more common, simply because you've started noticing it. It's not the world that changed. It's you. Your brain runs on two systems. One, selective attention. You focus more on what feels relevant now. 2. Confirmation bias. You assume it's happening more often because you keep seeing it. But in reality, it was always there. You just didn't care until now. Real-world examples. That slang word everyone's using, they used it last week too. Now your brain is just tuned in. That number that keeps appearing, your mind is filtering out everything else. It's not magic. It's pattern recognition on steroids. How it's used on you. Marketers love this. Once you see an ad, you start spotting that product everywhere. It feels when something seems to appear everywhere, ask yourself, is this actually more common? Or is my brain just locked onto it? Because your perception is a spotlight, and what you shine it on becomes your reality. Understand the illusion, own your attention, and shape your reality consciously. The McGurk Effect. What you see can completely change what you hear. This is the McGurk Effect, a mind-bending illusion where visual and auditory information clash, and your brain rewrites what you think you're hearing. How it works. Imagine this. You're listening to someone say, ba ba ba, over and over. But now watch a video of that same person saying, even though the audio never changes, your brain hears falsify it because your eyes override your ears. This effect was discovered in the 1970s by psychologist Harry McGurk. It proves something wild. What you see changes what you hear. Why it happens. Your brain doesn't process your senses in isolation. It blends them. Sight, sound, and context. They all fuse together to create a single experience of reality. When what you see doesn't match what you hear, your brain tries to resolve the mismatch, and perception gets warped. Real-world examples. Ever had trouble understanding someone in a noisy room? But suddenly it's easier when you can see their mouth. That's the McGurk Effect in action. Lip reading, facial expressions, body language. These visual cues help you hear better. It also explains why phone calls with no video are harder to follow than face-to-face conversations. Even subtitles can throw you off. If they don't match the voice, you might hear what's written instead of what's said. Why it matters. For the hearing impaired, mismatched cues can lead to major misperceptions. Next time you mishear something, ask, am I being tricked by what I'm seeing? Knowing the McGurk effect exists makes you more aware of how your senses deceive you and how your brain is constantly trying to make sense of the chaos. Final thought, the McGurk effect, like the frequency illusion, reminds us reality isn't just what you sense, it's what your brain decides to believe. The self-fulfilling prophecy, what you believe about yourself, others, and the world can actually shape reality. This is the self-fulfilling prophecy, a psychological phenomenon where expectations influence behavior, and that behavior makes the expectation come true. How it works. When you believe something will happen, you unconsciously start acting in ways that make it happen. Believe you're going to fail, you put in less effort, avoid risks, and you fail. Believe you'll succeed, you work harder, take initiative, and often you succeed. The famous study. In the 1960s, psychologist Robert Rosenthal ran a bold experiment. He told teachers that certain students were academic bloomers. Kids expected to show exceptional growth that year. But here's a twist. Those students were picked randomly. Yet by the end of the year, they outperformed their peers. Why? Because teachers gave them more attention, more encouragement, and higher expectations. And the students, in turn, believed in themselves and rose to meet those expectations. Real-life examples. A person who believes they're bad at math, they study less, doubt themselves, and perform poorly. Belief becomes a reality. Someone who sees themselves as charming and likable, they behave confidently, engage positively, and others respond in kind. A partner who fears abandonment might act jealous or distant and push their partner away, fulfilling the very outcome they feared. In health, career, and society, patients who believe they will recover often heal faster. Employees who expect success take more risks and grow. Students labeled troublemakers may internalize it and live up to that label. Even societal stereotypes act as self-fulfilling prophecies. Tell a group they're less intelligent or capable long enough, and belief starts to impact behavior, turning it into growth. Here's the good news. You can flip the script. By setting positive expectations for yourself and acting in alignment with them, you can create a positive feedback loop. Adopt a growth mindset. See failure as learning, not as a label. Believe in your potential and behave like it. You'll build momentum toward real change. Break the cycle. If you believe something bad is inevitable, pause and ask, am I doing things that make this more likely? And if you want a better outcome, start with a better belief and match it with better behavior. Final thought. The self-fulfilling prophecy shows that belief doesn't just shape perception, it shapes experience. Pair it with the Barnum Effect, and you realize our minds are powerful creators of our own reality. So be mindful of what you expect, because that's what you're building. The contrast principle. How something feels depends not just on what it is, but on what it's compared to. This is the contrast principle, a psychological effect where people judge things as better or worse, based on what came before, not on their actual value. Everyday examples. Hold a heavy box, then lift a light one. The light box will feel even lighter than it really is. See a $2,000 jacket, then a $300 one. The second jacket now feels like a steal, even though it's still expensive. Eat a mediocre meal, right after a terrible one. Suddenly it tastes amazing. This isn't logic, it's psychology. How marketers use it. Marketers love this principle. Show you the most expensive item first, and suddenly everything else feels reasonable. Realtors show you a rundown house first, so the next, still overpriced home feels like a deal. High-end restaurants place a $150 dish at the top of the menu, not to sell it, but to make the $60 entree look cheap. It's all about anchoring your expectations. It even affects people. A person may seem less attractive if they walk in after a supermodel, but that same person in a different room could be the most attractive one there. A strong job candidate looks even stronger if they follow a weak one. A charismatic speaker seems more engaging after someone dull. The contrast reshapes your perception. Expectations matter. If you expect an experience to be terrible and it turns out okay, it feels like a pleasant surprise. But if you expect it to be amazing and it's just okay, it feels like a disappointment. Your baseline changes the emotional outcome. How to use it? Want to use the contrast principle to your advantage? Compare your present to your past, not to someone else's peak. Celebrate progress by anchoring against where you started. Curb envy by shifting what you're comparing to. Be mindful of how marketers manipulate context. Remember, how something feels is often about what came before it, not what it truly is. Inner final thought. The contrast principle reveals just how relative perception really is. You don't see things as they are. You see them in comparison to everything else. Understand this, and you gain a powerful tool for better decision-making, less dissatisfaction, and a more balanced mindset. Repetition. Persuasion. The more often people hear something, the more likely they are to believe it, whether it's true or not. This is repetition. Persuasion, a psychological effect where repeated exposure to a statement makes it feel more credible, even without any real evidence. Why it works? The brain prefers familiarity. If something is repeated enough, it becomes easier to process. And when something is easy to process, the brain mistakes that ease for truth. The first time you hear something, it might sound wrong. The 5th or 10th time, it starts to feel like common knowledge. How it's used. Politicians repeat slogans. Make America great again. Yes, we can. Stronger together. Advertisers repeat jingles, brand names, catchphrases, not to inform but to embed. Even if people don't believe the message at first, repetition slowly shapes perception. The dark side, misinformation. Repetition, persuasion is dangerous when it spreads lies. A false statement, repeated often enough, can feel true, not because of facts, but because of familiarity. That's how conspiracy theories spread, fake news takes hold, misleading statistics shape opinion. People assume, if I've heard it so many times, it must be true. But that's not how truth works. Social internal effects. Rumors repeated over and over change how others view a person even without proof. Negative self-talk like, I'm not good enough, if repeated, becomes a belief. But it works both ways. Repeat positive affirmations like, I am capable, I am strong, and you can rewire your brain to believe that instead. How to defend yourself. To resist repetition, persuasion, always question information, not just because it's familiar, but because it's verifiably true. Fact check even things you feel are right. Be aware that your beliefs may have been shaped by repetition, not logic. Final thought. Both repetition, persuasion, and the contrast principle show how the brain doesn't think in absolutes. It thinks in patterns and exposure. One alters judgment based on what came before. The other creates belief through constant repetition. By understanding these biases, you protect your mind, strengthen your decisions, and think more clearly in a world full of noise. The fear then relief technique. Fear is a powerful motivator. And when it's followed by a wave of relief, people become more compliant, more agreeable, and less critical. This is the fear then relief technique, a psychological manipulation tactic where fear is induced first and then comfort is offered, making the person more likely to follow requests. Why it works. Fear disrupts normal thinking. When someone is scared, their brain enters a fight or flight state, focused entirely on the perceived threat. But when relief suddenly follows, their mind relaxes and resistance drops. This emotional swing creates a moment of vulnerability where the person becomes highly suggestible. Real-world examples. 1. Scam emails. Your bank account is compromised. Click this link to secure it now. That immediate relief? It disarms your critical thinking, and you click without hesitation. 2. Marketing tactics. Infomercials start by showing how terrible life is without their product. Broken tools, painful knees, messy kitchens. Then, they offer the fix, a simple product that solves everything. Your brain, relieved, says, "Yes, I need that." 3. Authority in politics. A looming crisis is announced. War, crime, health emergencies. Then comes the message. Support this law. Accept this restriction. It's for your safety. Fear, then relief, followed by compliance. 4. Everyday persuasion. A boss says, "I'm disappointed in your performance, but I believe in you. Work extra hours and you'll recover." That emotional roller coaster makes it hard to say no. How to defend yourself. When fear strikes, pause. Ask, is this fear justified? Is the offered solution really in my best interest? Look for the pattern. Was there a threat followed by a fix? Stay calm. Fear-based compliance is rarely wise compliance. Final thought. The fear then relief technique works because it hijacks emotion and lowers resistance. But by staying aware of this tactic, you keep control of your decisions, your actions, and your mind. The sleeper effect. You hear something untrue. You dismiss it because the source is unreliable. But weeks later, you remember the message and forget where it came from. Now, you believe it. That's the sleeper effect, a psychological phenomenon where discredited information becomes more persuasive over time. Why it happens? People forget sources faster than messages. At first, the claim is rejected. That's false. That source isn't trustworthy. But days or weeks later, they remember the statement without the skepticism attached. And that's when it slips into belief. Real-life examples. 1. Fake news. You see a misleading headline. You know it's fake, but it sticks in your memory. Later, it feels familiar, so you believe it. 2. Political campaigns. Attack ads spread false or exaggerated claims. Even when people reject them, they often remember the insult, but forget the rebuttal. Isn't that the guy who, I'm not sure where I heard it, but yeah, I think so. That's sleeper effect in action. 3. Advertisements and propaganda. Brands make bold or exaggerated claims. This will change your life. Doctors recommend it. People doubt it at first, but after repetition, it sinks in. 4. Stereotypes in culture, movies, music, social media, messages about beauty, success, gender roles. They don't need to be convincing at first. They just need to be repeated. Eventually, they shape society's beliefs. How to protect yourself. Always consider the source even weeks later. Ask, where did I hear this? Was it credible? If you can't remember the source, don't trust the message. Reevaluate your beliefs. Some ideas you hold may have started as discredited claims that crept in over time. Watch for repetition, familiar true. Final thought. The sleeper effect doesn't convince you instantly. It lurks, waiting for time and forgetfulness to do the work. Together with the fear then relief technique, it shows how manipulation can be sudden or subtle, but always effective. Unless you're aware of it. The peak end rule. When people remember an experience, they don't remember everything. They remember 2 moments, the peak and the end. This is the peak end rule, a psychological bias where memories are shaped by the most intense moment and how it concluded, not by the entire experience. How it works. You don't average every second of a vacation. You remember the best or worst moment and the ending. You don't judge a movie by its total runtime. You remember the scene that hit hardest and whether it finished strong. Real-life examples. A bad relationship with a beautiful final moment. It's remembered fondly. A great meal with a terrible aftertaste. It's remembered badly. An okay vacation with one magical day and a smooth ending. It feels amazing in hindsight. How to use it. Design better experiences. If you're planning an event, a product, a date, focus on creating a powerful peak and a satisfying ending. End difficult things well. Whether it's a project, a job, or a breakup, ending on a positive note can reshape the entire memory. Reframe your own memories. Was the whole thing really bad? Or are you just focused on the worst part? Take a step back. What was the peak? How did it end? What about everything in between? Bonus insight. The peak end rule pairs with the priming effect. Priming shapes how we experience. Peak end shapes how we remember. Together they remind us, memory isn't reality. It's a highlight reel edited by emotion and endings. Final thought. Want to make something memorable? Don't just fill it with good moments. Craft a high point and finish strong. Because in the end, that's what people will remember. The status quo bias. People tend to resist change, even when a better option is right in front of them. This is the status quo bias, a psychological tendency to prefer things just the way they are. Even if the current situation is inefficient, outdated, or harmful, we stay because it's familiar. Why it happens. The brain likes predictability. Change means risk, effort, and uncertainty. So we default to inaction, telling ourselves, better the devil you know. Real-world examples. Employees who are automatically enrolled in savings plans, they rarely opt out, even if they didn't enroll themselves before. Consumers sticking with the same brand for years, not because it's the best, but because it's familiar. People staying in unhappy relationships, not out of love, but out of fear of the unknown. How businesses use it. Subscription services use auto-renewals because they know. Canceling takes effort. Companies make their product the default option because most people won't bother changing it. The status quo sells because people stick with what they already have. The cost of staying still. The status quo bias holds us back from trying new habits, taking smarter financial steps, leaving toxic situations, embracing innovation, growing personally and professionally. Sometimes staying the same is riskier than changing. How to break the bias. Ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's best or because it's familiar? Reframe change as an opportunity, not a threat. Start small. Try something new. Challenge the idea that comfort always means safety, because growth only happens outside the status quo. The default bias. People are more likely to stick with pre-selected options than make an active choice, even if better alternatives exist. This is the default bias, a cognitive shortcut where people accept the default setting simply because it's easier. Why it happens. Decision-making takes mental effort. Choosing something new requires weighing options, analyzing risks, taking action. To save energy, the brain often says, let's just go with what's already there. Real-world proof. In countries where organ donation is the default, opt-out only, donation rates are over 90%. In countries where people must opt in, rates drop to just 15%. It's not about beliefs, it's about defaults. How businesses use it. Streaming platforms auto-renew subscriptions. Apps pre-select data tracking and notifications. Employers auto-enroll you in benefit programs. Why? Because they know most people won't change the default. They told everyday life examples. You keep factory phone settings. You use preset permissions. You stick with the same insurance or investment plan, even if it's outdated or overpriced. Gain. You eat the portion you're served, not what you actually need. The downside. Default bias can cause you to overpay for subscriptions, miss better opportunities, stay in inefficient routines, avoid optimizing finances, health, or tech. You don't choose badly, you just don't choose at all. How to break the bias? Ask yourself, am I choosing this because it's right, or just because it's the default? Review your app and privacy settings. Adjust subscriptions. Compare financial and insurance plans. Don't settle select. Even small intentional choices can lead to massive long-term gains. Final thought. Status quo bias keeps you stuck in the familiar. Default bias keeps you stuck in what's handed to you. Recognize both and reclaim control over your decisions, your habits, and your direction in life. The Reciprocity Principle. When someone does something for you, you feel compelled to return the favor. This is the Reciprocity Principle, a psychological tendency to repay kindness, even if you didn't ask for it. Where it comes from. In ancient societies, helping others increased survival. The rule was simple. If I help you today, you help me tomorrow. Over time, this became an automatic social norm. We feel uncomfortable being in someone's debt. How it's used: free samples at stores, free gifts from charities, mints with your restaurant bill, personalized notes from a sales rep. Each one is designed to trigger obligation. Studies show people tip more, donate more, and buy more when they receive even a small gesture first. In daily life, a coworker covers your shift. Now you feel you should cover theirs. A friend helps you move, and you're ready to return the favor. In relationships, even small compliments or helpful actions create a desire to reciprocate. The dark side. Some people exploit reciprocity. Scammers offer free gifts, then ask for personal info. Pushy salespeople give perks before pressuring you to buy. These aren't kindnesses, they're tactics. Use it wisely. Give without expecting anything in return. But if someone gives to manipulate you, remember, you don't owe more than feels fair. Reciprocity should build connection, not create obligation. The false memory effect. You think your memory is a recording, but it's more like a reconstruction. This is the false memory effect, where people believe something happened, even when it didn't. The science behind it. Each time you recall a memory, your brain fills in missing details based on meaning, emotions, expectations, outside influence. Over time, the memory becomes distorted or even fabricated. Classic study. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus showed that the wording of a question changes what people remember. How fast was the car going when it smashed into the other vehicle? People remembered a more violent crash. How fast was it going when it hit the vehicle? People recalled a milder event. Same footage, different memory. Real-life impact. Eyewitnesses can be mistaken. Wrongful convictions happen. Family stories turn into believed memories. Kids believe they were clumsy just because they were told so. The Mandela Effect. You swear the Monopoly man had a monocle. He didn't. You're sure it was the Berenstain Bears. It was Berenstain. These are examples of collective false memories formed by association, not fact. Media influence, news outlets, viral posts, repeated narratives. These shape what we think we remember, even when we weren't there. How to protect yourself. Be skeptical of vague or emotional memories. Confirm with facts, not just feelings. Know that your brain edits memories without asking. Just because you remember it vividly doesn't mean it actually happened. The false memory effect. Conclusion. Always question details that feel fuzzy or too perfect. If a memory seems unusually clear, but lacks specific proof, pause. Ask yourself, could this have been influenced by outside sources? Keeping written records, photos, or factual evidence can help separate real memories from reconstructed ones. Your brain is powerful. but it's not a perfect historian. Final reflection. Both the Reciprocity Principle and the false memory effect reveal how the mind is shaped by social expectations, cognitive distortions. One makes us act out of obligation, even when we didn't ask for the favor. The other convinces us we remember things that never happened. Understanding these biases helps. Protect your boundaries, guard against manipulation, and maintain a clearer view of reality. Because sometimes what you feel, what you remember, and what's actually true are three very different things.